Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Traveling Therapist Podcast. I'm really excited to have our guest today, Jen Kantor. She's got a super cool story. I don't even know all the details yet, so I'm really excited just to dive in and figure this stuff out. So, Jen, thank you for being here. And I always start out with that question, like, how'd you go from being just a traditional therapist to a traveling therapist?
Thank you so much for having me, Kim. I'm
You're
just
welcome.
thrilled to be here. I don't know if I can say I was ever really a traditional therapist per se. I
Yeah.
did a fair bit of traveling, sort of doing different outreach mental health type services in my 20s, not with a
Cool.
particular organization per se, but just different things that really piqued my interest of being in international settings and specifically regarding mental health. And then I would say for 10 years, like during the process in which I was able to get licensed, I was working as a school-based therapist in a health clinic in a Seattle
Oh,
public school. So it was kind of like a private practice in that I was on my own there. It wasn't paying the same as a private practice might, but it was basically a public health clinic in a
yeah.
school. And
Oh,
so I worked really closely with our nurse practitioner there, and it was comprehensive health model. And I loved it. I loved the population. I loved the clientele. A lot of the young people I was working with, I think a lot of us get into the work this way.
yeah.
We're just young people who were the most amazing, resilient, had walked across continents to get to safety. And this type of population that's so, so resilient. At some point during that time, I became a mom. And then I was in Seattle and I was like, ooh, how can I be a parent and
Mhm.
also work in public health, mental health services and
Yeah.
provide for my little family? And a good friend of mine said, well, you should go work in the international schools. You don't have to live paycheck to paycheck, especially not with your credentials. And initially I thought to myself, I don't think they're looking for me. They're
Yeah.
looking for like a school counselor who does, scheduling and things like this, which I'm very much not interested in. And she encouraged me and said, I would just get out there and put yourself out there and see. So I did a round of different interviews, applied for a bunch of different schools, and I got two offers, one in Lebanon and one in Brazil. So I moved to Brazil as a single mom. And something that's very cool about the international school system, depending on the school, you have to do your research, but they provide housing, they provide top healthcare, they provide round trip tickets
What?
back to your home of whatever where you said your home was. And sometimes on top of that, there's a lot of other perks and bonuses. So that was really cool. That's what initially
That
sort
is
of got me to Brazil.
awesome. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Because when I read your bio, I didn't even realize there was a child involved. So you just take your child with you. And I guess they go to the school. They go to the school system there, or I need to know everything. Like, whoa, that is amazing. Yeah.
It was really cool. So I went to Brazil and my kid could just attend the school where I was, which was great because I was in the high school, she was in elementary, and I could kind of do just as much helicopter parenting as I wanted to do. And I would say a challenge about that particular position is even though they knew my credentials and background when they hired me, I think they were also still looking for someone who wanted to do this other side of school counseling. So
Mm,
in terms of sort of what's my passion, that was a challenge for me to say, okay, how
yeah.
can I do both of these things? Because this is my job, so I need to do what they're asking of me.
Yeah.
And the cool part about that was when you are in a school, if you feel that you have supportive administration, you can say, hey, I want to do a real talk with Jen after school for the students. And can you provide the
Oh,
snacks? And can you
awesome.
let me do this wellness program or that mental health focus? And I
Yeah.
really got to do that pretty well at that school. And then
Oh
while
my
I was
gosh.
there, I got
Yeah.
to meet an amazing, wonderful Brazilian man who I then married.
Oh, wow.
And then we decided together to, after about 5 years at the school, it felt like it was time to move on. So I went for the recruiting cycle again. And then I was able to get a job here in Switzerland where I live now. So in the meantime,
So
we've
cool.
expanded our family. And what's really great about this school that I feel so fortunate about is they really trust me and let me do my thing. They let me do my mental health and
Yeah.
well-being thing, which I have to be obviously mindful about
Hmm.
because I don't have a license in Switzerland. I have to be careful about how I present my credentials. And of course, I can't technically diagnose. So I'm
Yeah.
really careful in those conversations how I phrase things. But I
Interesting.
really am able to do a lot of therapeutic work with the students
Oh,
here.
that's amazing. So for myself and those listening, like what exactly is an international school? Because, I'm not even that clear on it. Is it like the school that the expats kids go to? I don't even know really what an international school is because I don't have kids or anything.
That's a great question. So, I mean, I think it can really depend on
Okay.
the country and the scenario. This is a Swiss boarding school,
Okay,
so
gotcha.
very international. We have a handful of American students. We have really students from every corner of the world. Of course, as you can imagine, one has to be in a certain bracket to be able to
Yeah.
attend a Swiss boarding school. We do have students here who have access to scholarships or whose parents work with certain companies and then they are allowed scholarships here. So
Wow.
this is a very international school just in terms of students are from all over the world. And in Brazil, there were about 50% Brazilians in the school and then 50% students of
Oh,
their parents worked for different companies and they were there, and either they were diplomat kids or they were working, whatever, at gas and oil, you name it. But
yeah.
this school, it is like technically called an American school, although
Mm.
there's not so many Americans here. We follow the International Baccalaureate program schedule for students who want to pursue that academic route. So yeah, I would say it's very international in
Hmm.
that people are from all over, and we have
Yeah.
staff also from all over, I would say.
Now, do they expect you to speak other languages like Brazil? I mean, what is Brazil? Do they speak Portuguese in Brazil? Did you need to know other languages, or was it like, no, we just need Americans to speak great English and
That's a great question. And I'm a little bit embarrassed because in my 20s, I was definitely a very judgmental traveler. Like, wait, you've lived here for how long and you don't speak the language? And
yeah.
then when I was in Brazil, and due to a variety of factors, including COVID and pregnancy brain, I
Oh
wasn't
gosh.
ever able to fully grasp Portuguese. And I think
It looks like a very hard language.
that's something that there's been a lot of papers and research written about, like
Mm,
international schools in general, and how
okay.
when you look at the origins of those, these are for us, and sometimes historically, like, us meant white people, us meant
Hmm.
English speaking people. So that said, I
Yes.
think there are some problematic, if you look back at the history, and I can't speak to the history of the school where I'm at now, it's a Swiss boarding school, but
Yeah.
if you look at international schools around the world, it's by and large always been easy to be a white person, a
Hmm.
white English
Mm,
speaking person sort of
interesting.
going into this world. And that's probably another podcast for another time of
Yeah.
the lie of white supremacy, et cetera. But that said, so I didn't master Portuguese, although my older daughter is totally fluent. And of course, my husband speaks Portuguese. So, and here it's good to speak French. I have an okay level because I did live in France a long time ago, but it's not a requirement to work here.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm sure everybody listening is like, "Oh my God, I want to do that. How do I do that?" So, could you tell us, like, because I guess I was reading your bio, right? And did you go to school internationally? Do I remember that correctly? Like, you got your, I don't know if it was your master's or your undergrad, like internationally, and then your major was like international studies, right? And social work or something like that?
Yeah, so I did go to graduate school in London and
Okay.
I found a
Oh,
master's of
nice.
international social work and community development. And fortunately
Wow.
for me, that degree transferred to the US, so I was able to get licensed in the
Nice.
US. I'm
Okay.
not sure how much that has helped me with the international school job.
Yeah.
I think for any listeners who are curious, and I want to make a side note and say that I've listened to some of your podcasts and heard some of just the really cool digital
Yeah.
nomads and, I don't want to say vagabond, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, for me anyway, I know that there are people who are parents who do this, but as a parent and with two
Yeah.
kids, I really appreciate the stability of, okay, health insurance. Okay, this is your
Yes.
school. If I don't want to homeschool, which I don't, there's an option here. That's good. But
So good.
regarding the question of how to get into it, there's a few different websites that
Okay.
I'd be happy to share and we can put in the show notes. I mean, and I think the thing that's hard, and you have to have a willing heart, which I'm sure the adventurers listening do have willing hearts.
Yeah. They're like,
Um,
we'll make anything work. Yeah.
Totally. And especially in this moment where maybe a lot of people are interested in leaving the US for a
Hmm.
variety of reasons, the willingness to know that you won't just get to do therapy and you might not really get to exactly do
Hmm.
therapy in the way that you're accustomed to. This
Yeah.
position I have now feels very special to me because
Mm.
I think in general in a school setting, they're not really wanting you to be practicing on campus for so many reasons. But because it's a boarding school and so the students are far away from home, we're basically all of us who work here are like their parents here. And I would say as a therapist, that's another
Mm.
special challenge to navigate is, when you're a therapist in your own world, you're not running into your clients everywhere per se. And because our family lives on campus, that means a student I might see might also be doing boxing lessons with my husband, might also run into my child and see how I parent in the cafeteria. And coming from the US, that's so uncomfortable for me
Yeah,
at
it's like
times.
super immersive, just like, yeah.
The boundaries are hard, yeah.
Yeah, I bet. So your job is, I'm hearing you say over and over, it's not like your traditional like therapist role. So is it more like we're doing case management, we're helping think about college, we're like, helping with coping skills in like a school setting, like dealing with other kids, like maybe the girls are gossipy, like is it that kind of stuff or like what type of stuff are you doing with them?
So, yeah, I would say while I was in Brazil, it was more of, okay, we want you to talk to this kid about which junior and senior courses they should take on their way to college, to which I felt, are you sure you want me to do that? I don't, that's not really my background and expertise, but I'll give it a shot. Versus my present role, which is way more ongoing mental health support. And of course,
Yeah.
as I said, I'm careful kind of how I write notes, et cetera, because I can't say that I am
Yeah.
practicing as a licensed clinician here. And at the same time, I would say I'm definitely therapeutically supporting a number of the same students on a weekly basis, whether it's about the gossipy girls or whether
Mhm.
it's about case management, like, oh, you need a morning after pill? Okay, let me work with the health center and support you in that
Nice.
way. And what's nice about our health center is that even though we are in the school, we work for the school, we have our own healthcare management platform. So the students know that if they don't want the teachers or the administrators to know something, we won't share that with them. So we are allowed to practice in a confidential way, which hopefully increases the young people's trust in us.
Nice. Gosh, I just have so many questions. Okay, so you mentioned like a recruiting process. So I guess you said there's websites. So somebody would go to these websites and then just, I guess they have applications for different schools or something all over the world. And you just put your credential, send a resume or whatever, and then they just start interviewing if you're appropriate for it.
Definitely. I mean,
Wow.
I think, there's a lot of counseling positions that you see,
Uh-huh.
and depending on what you're open to and interested in, you want to look for more of like what's titled an SEL, social emotional learning counselor,
Okay.
versus, and obviously you'll read the job description. You see most of the counseling positions are college counselor, and that's
Oh,
obviously a whole different kind of
yeah.
world. And for some, they expect you to be able to do mental health and well-being plus college counseling, and that's a big ask.
I'm
So I
thinking like,
think,
gosh, I don't think I could do that. Career
yeah,
counseling, like I don't even know what all that would involve. It seems very complicated.
yes, it is. I will
Mhm.
say I
Yeah.
did some of that in my last role, and I found it a challenge just because I felt like, for me, of course, being in
Yeah.
my field, I felt like, well, mental health is way more important, and we're not going to bring up college when the student's having a meltdown about their future. Like, that's not
Yeah.
the right time to talk about that. And yeah, I can sort of say some of these different websites. I actually found both of my jobs through
Oh,
Search Associates, which also has a hiring fair. So for my second position internationally, I went to the hiring fair in Boston from Brazil, and I got this position here, and I feel really great to be living in
that's amazing.
Switzerland.
So, how many international schools are there in the world? There's like a hub in Switzerland and Brazil and a couple of major places, or are they like hundreds and hundreds of these things?
Oh,
Oh,
yeah, hundreds if not thousands.
wow. Oh, that's amazing. And
Mhm.
like, how many positions like this are there at different Are you the only one, or does it, I guess it depends on how many students and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I will say that just, I certainly have a lot of peers and colleagues who've been in this game a lot
Yeah.
longer than me and can speak more to this. But I will say in my time, the amount of times I've seen a specific position like this listed where I just really get to focus on mental health are more rare. But
Mhm.
at my school, I have one colleague that is also full time, and he's a licensed professional counselor, also from the U.S. So when should someone like want to start this recruiting process? Obviously the pros are whether you're single or with a family, but in some of these places, you can easily live on one income and housing's provided. And in my case, because I'm at boarding school, all food is provided.
My gosh. So there's like literally no expenses except for if you want to go do things outside of yeah.
That's right. Unless you have kids that need aftercare or daycare, things like
True.
that.
Yeah.
But otherwise, no. So for the
Wow.
recruiting process, it helps if you have had some experience in schools and if you have experience internationally, because, sometimes it happens that someone might move. I mean, I guess this can happen in any
Hmm.
field where you move to a new country and you're like, I'm not really cut out for this. They don't want people who might not be in it for the long run. So if you have international experience and if you have some work in education or school related, it's worth a shot, because I definitely felt when I began the process and I was reading the job descriptions, I thought, well, I haven't done that and I haven't really done
Yeah.
that. And I worked in a school for 10 years, but I worked for public
Oh.
health.
Oh, right. Yeah, right. So how does the licensing work? So you're licensed in, was it Washington? Did you say Washington State? So you're licensed in Washington State. You had like a private practice for a while. I'm assuming you don't, I'm guessing this is like a full-time thing. Like you wouldn't have a side practice or anything like that.
Well, actually, I never had a private practice. I was working as a practitioner through Spring Health, which is virtual, and I really loved that experience. I had to stop with them because they weren't able to allow people out of the country anymore. I loved working with them because that was some of my initial long-term work with adults, because I'm very, accustomed to teenagers. But I really, through that experience, it felt great. I loved working with a wider range of ages.
Oh, so neat. Yeah, Spring Health, that's like an EAP company, right? Is that more EAP than traditional like Alma Headway? Okay, gotcha. So how does the licensing work? Like I know in Brazil, maybe the regulations are different than in Switzerland, I'm guessing, for what you can and can't do, or is it pretty similar? Like don't call yourself a therapist, don't treat people on our soil if you're not licensed, like however you get licensed in Brazil and Switzerland, I guess, right? Is that
I believe so. I mean, I think, from what I understand, and I'm learning more and more from your Facebook page, but as a Washington State clinician, I can only practice with Washington State residents. So I keep up with my license. I do all my continuing education every year. Sometimes I ask, like, would this count? For example, I was just meeting with another LCSW the other day who works at another international school in Switzerland. And she gave for like there's a Swiss group of international schools. So we had a school
neat?
counselor collaborative meeting, and she sort of gave us our quick training on suicide prevention and suicide protocols. And so in this case, of course, I want to look into this and say, okay, can this count for these CEUs that I need for
Oh,
my
yes.
licensure, because we're both, LCSWs. But I keep up with my license, and I'm looking to, in part, thanks to the resources that you offer, I'm
Mhm.
looking to maybe take on one or two private pay
Oh.
clients in Washington State, or I'm
Mhm.
also looking into the process here in Switzerland. Like I can practice if I get
Yeah.
certain credentials, but I can't practice, I just have to practice with whatever credentials they will allow me to have here.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because, it does depend on the country because some clinicians, they're licensed in a state, but they see lots of expats internationally. And, as long as the country they're in is okay with it, because most of our licenses, and this is just education for anybody listening, most of our licenses say you can practice under your license in your state of licensure, but there's no regulations around what you want to do outside. You're just not going to be protected by a license or by your liability insurance if you're doing it outside of, your state of licensure, which is so interesting to me. So you have to like check with that country to see, is it okay if I see your citizens? Is there any regulations around that? And like you said, Switzerland's got different rules and regulations around what that means than maybe Brazil does, or maybe any other. All the countries are different. Some could care less, like Mexico. I don't think there's any, I don't think they care at all what you do, as long as, you're paying taxes appropriately if you're supposed to pay taxes there. So it gets super complicated, but yeah, so interesting. I think this is the coolest little niche. I really, not little, like, minimizing or anything, but just the coolest thing is like you could probably just go anywhere now, especially with, of course you want to keep it stable for your kids and all that stuff. But gosh, you could be like, yeah, now let's go to China or whatever, whatever you wanted to do. That's so neat to me.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I do feel, because I took that initial leap to Brazil, of course, that helped me with the job. Most likely, that helped me
Yeah.
jump into this role, because of course they like to see that you have some international school experience. But I'm very thankful to that first school in Brazil for saying, okay, we see that you're never a traditional school counselor and have just done therapeutic work, but
Yeah.
we will take a chance and hire you. And obviously that move to Brazil was very monumental in my life.
Yes. Oh my God. Of course, you met your husband and had another child. That's amazing. So you stayed in Brazil for 5 years and now you're in this place. How long have you been in the one in Switzerland?
This is we're coming to the end of our second year, and some of the considerations just for anyone listening. In our situation, for example, we have a our boarding school is for students or people 7th to 12th grade. So when we came here, my daughter was in 5th grade. So that meant she needed to attend the local school, and that was in French. And so
Mm.
just keeping in mind, depending where you go, doing your research about how will the local school be, because if you'll be working with the school, you won't have time necessarily to homeschool or those kind of things. The pros of that time are that she learned French. As she already had Portuguese, it was easier for her. And there, of course, you can imagine in a small Swiss village, there are certain differences about like views on education and things like that. And my daughter will soon start attending the school where I work now this coming August. And that feels really great. I would say, in terms of another perk to
Mhm.
weigh, if you're considering this kind of a leap, is that, it's not usually just that they provide housing, and it's not usually just that they provide flight to and from your home of origin. But this school, which as a Swiss boarding school is fairly expensive for
Yeah.
most people, usually your child can attend almost for free.
That's amazing. Wow. And I'm sure it's like top-notch education. I'm guessing it's got to be pretty great. Oh my
Yeah, I
goodness.
mean, I think besides the fact that we have some great teachers, just the opportunities of, oh, this weekend, we're doing a fashion trip to Milan, or we're
Oh my
doing,
gosh.
a
Really?
quick hop over to Chamonix, France for the day, or because we're so centrally located. So, for a lot of our students coming from South America or Saudi Arabia, it's fun to be so central in Europe and so quick to go to some very cool places, cool,
Wow.
safe.
And do you get to go too? Are you like part of the field trip or?
A lot of our staff, I'm not always
Okay.
able to because of family responsibilities, but
Yes.
staff, yes, staff get paid to go to, Italy for the weekend and chaperone.
That is amazing. Oh my gosh. This episode is going to blow up. You're going to be like, people are going to be applying for jobs everywhere. This is so cool. This is the first time I've ever had a guest on that's even talked about this. So it's really
Oh,
interesting to me. Yeah. So
yay.
neat.
One other thing that, I suppose anyone in private practice is already working with a particular bracket of people, I would
Mhm.
imagine. And I think for me, one major consideration that I've just worked through over time is leaving the population that I worked with in Seattle, where a lot of the students, young people or my clients didn't have access to resources otherwise. And so it is an interesting shift when you
Mhm.
begin working with the opposite end of the bracket. And I would say it took me some time to adjust to that. It took me some
That's
time to
interesting.
adjust to, my take on affluent neglect and
Mhm.
how that impacts young people. And when you're coming from just the opposite world of, oh, wow, you didn't eat yesterday. So that's our first
Yeah.
item, is
Yeah. Let's
getting you
make sure
some
you have
food.
lunch somehow. Yeah.
Yes, or let's make sure you
Wow.
have somewhere to go after school.
That's
To here, which is, of course, just a very different world. And I think I'm getting more mature, hopefully. But it used to kind of bother me when people would be like, well, mental health is mental health. And, everyone suffers and it just looks different depending your bracket. And
Mm-hmm.
I would just think, yeah, but if you're homeless, it's totally
It's
different.
totally different. It's like way worse.
Way
Yeah.
worse.
I mean,
But I will say that, like, working
yeah.
with the young people that I do here, this is year 7, so hopefully I do, but I do
Oh,
love it.
wow.
I really love it. And just the ability, I mean, I've always loved working with young people because I think it feels so much more hopeful sometimes than with adults, because adults, depending on their age, I'm not saying I'm cynical, but you can have a feeling of like, oh, it's so hard for adults to change something. And I'm speaking as an adult
Yeah.
who finds it hard
Yeah.
to change things,
Yeah.
versus with teenagers, they're still just so like open and
So
willing
cool.
to examine and say, okay, well, here's what's going on, and listen to your perspective, especially when they're in boarding school, away
Yes.
from everything.
Yeah. And this term, affluent neglect, that's so interesting. Yeah. I mean, because I've thought about that. You hear about kids that go to boarding school their whole lives. It does. And as in the therapist in me, it's like, gosh, I don't know. You send your kids away forever. You see them like at Christmas and they start when they're like 6. Like, I don't get this. Like, it just seems totally counterintuitive to what I know of like people being parents and having their kids with them all the time. It's such an interesting dynamic. Yeah, I feel like you could write a whole thing about that. You probably have. I don't know about how to help people cope with that. I mean, I guess you develop, like you said, your own family within this boarding school system with the therapists and the teachers and the people that live on campus and everything. But that's always been a really interesting concept to me.
Yeah, and there are boarding schools in Switzerland that take very young children, and we take only start from 12, and even
Okay.
12 seems very young to be.
Seems like it kind of breaks my heart a little bit, but I mean, everybody's seen like a movie, where it's like the kid's in boarding school and his dad's, golfing internationally and he's too busy to come home for Christmas and the kid's sitting in boarding school. I mean, like, gosh, that stuff really, oof. Even though, they're rich and it's like not okay. Oh, you're rich still, but it seems awful to me. Yeah. I don't know. I think that'd be
Yeah.
hard as a therapist to help them cope with that.
I mean, of course, it really depends. Like we have some students here who, depending on their age and stage, they might say, it just looked like such a cool opportunity. I researched it. I
Oh,
talked my parents into it.
oh,
They said I could come for the year. Or
mm,
other students who might have scholarships who were like, I worked really
mm,
hard to get here. And they're older, tend to be older students. And
gotcha.
here I am. I'm so fortunate for this opportunity. And,
Mm,
that's just very different from students who've just been in boarding school for so long. And sometimes you have the feeling, and of course, as a parent who is in the trenches and has been in the trenches of parenting, of course you think, oh, yeah, sure, that would be really easy to just send your kids away. But
wow.
otherwise, like it is hard for me to imagine. It's hard for me to
Yeah.
imagine what that is. And in case any of my clients' parents ever find me and are listening to me
Yeah.
say this, I want to make the caveat like what we all know as therapists, which is that obviously we're all doing the best we can with the tools we have, and we make the best decisions based
Right.
on what we believe is best for our children. And I think that's been another interesting thing, and I'm trying to say that in a diplomatic way.
Yeah.
But, as we've seen in different cultures where,
Hmm.
for example, in Brazil, where physical appearance, especially
Yeah.
in certain brackets, is just so important. So there were
Yes.
stories of 11-year-olds who would
Mm.
have mom take them for cellulite treatment. And
Oh,
that would be an
yes.
example of, I'm doing this for you
Hmm.
because you will go further if you
Yeah.
are perceived as beautiful. And once you're perceived as beautiful, you'll have more chance at success in life. And I think that a lot of our parents, depending on the background or country, the thought is if you can solidify your English and go
Hmm.
to boarding school in Switzerland, that's going to get you these other opportunities that
Yeah.
you wouldn't
Yeah.
otherwise have.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I could totally see the other side of it too from the parent perspective. It's like, let me send you to this really elite school where you're going to get top-notch education, international exposure, like think I'm busy working, and this is going to like really give you that well-rounded lifestyle and, I don't know what you would call it, like basis for the rest of your life, develop you as a human with all of this international exposure. Like I could totally see the parent side of it too, the other side of it that helps you make that decision. It's like I have the means and this is an amazing opportunity. And the different issues that would come up because I was reading somebody's Facebook the other day and he was like he did a blog post about how he became a therapist to like the rich and famous basically in New York City and his like biases and how he had to adapt and understand how to treat that population and shift from like okay you're not homeless like what like that kind of thing, not to be awful about it, but that's what he was saying in the blog post and I was like this is such an interesting dynamic and how he had to adapt and realize that there's a whole other thing that goes on. Like when you have all that money and, you don't want people to know you have the money, you like your social circle becomes very small because you only want to socialize with people that are in the same sort of bracket. Like it's a whole thing. And I was like, this is such an interesting dynamic. And hearing you talk about this, it's making me think about it too.
Yeah, and I think especially with teenagers, because we know teenagers are all just trying to find themselves. And so, we certainly have those students who might not want others to know who their parents are or what company the family owns. And then, of
Mm,
course, there's a whole other group of kids, and we all knew these kids in high school as well, who are all about the brand names and all about flaunting wealth. And it's a real challenge. For example, like my child will come to this school
yeah.
and we are modest people and we won't be spending thousands of dollars on designer clothes. That's not going to be what we do.
Mhm.
And so she will have to navigate, her peers being
Yeah. Yeah.
extremely more wealthy than she is. And, of course, when I have the chance to have those conversations with her, I remind her like, let's look at how fortunate we are. Let's look at this from the big picture. But of course, when you're a preteen or teen, your parents, it's just like blah, blah, blah. What are you talking about? Because I still want the latest this and that.
Yeah, and this is like next level. Like for me, it was like Guess jeans. I mean, these kids probably have just crazy, like $100,000, I would imagine, like bags or jackets or, just like, oh my gosh, I couldn't even imagine.
That's right. And it's really interesting. And of course, another world for me when I hear the
Yeah.
students sort of describing to me like so and so's clearly very new wealth, new money. Which
Wild.
is just very, it's fascinating to
It
me
is
to be like,
fascinating.
okay,
Oh
what
my
what
gosh.
does new money look like?
Yeah.
I'm
How do you
curious about
know?
that. Yeah, it's
That's
really interesting,
incredible.
and I will say, I keep saying, but it's really true. Like I love the school where I am, and I love
Yes.
the
I get
population,
that.
and I've had to just lean into the discomfort of everybody
Yeah.
can see my whole life. I don't have any
Yeah.
boundaries.
Right.
I can't say, if somebody asks me a question like about my personal life, which typically as therapists, we make the call of, is this appropriate to share with you? Will this be beneficial to you? And my favorite like therapist quote that guides me in everything in life is Irvin Yalom, it's the relationship that heals. And so I always go from that of like, is this relevant information for you? Will this benefit our relationship for me to say
Yeah.
something personal about myself? But I don't even have that option to keep my life personal. But I will say, like, I have a biracial family, and I will say that for like the students of color that I work with,
Mm,
I do believe it really matters to them when
I
they
do too.
see who my family is. I think it
Mhm.
makes a difference that they might have a sense that, hopefully they have a sense that I care anyway, talking about injustice or microaggressions or things like that. But my hope and my belief is that they also feel like you might get it a little bit more than the average white person. So in that way, like having my family and life on display, while it feels very strange to me, I just have to get used to it. Like it is what my life is, and
Yeah.
I have to
Wow.
lean
That's so
into it.
cool. And did I hear you say that your husband also works? I heard you say boxing with my husband. Does he also work in the school system or is he like ancillary to it?
Well, something that just it worked out really fortunately for us.
Yeah.
And he hadn't worked in a school prior, but he's kind of a jack of all trades and can do everything. And he is also a master IT guy, and they happen to need an IT
Oh,
person.
wow.
So yeah, he's a systems manager with the IT department. And that
That's
worked
cool.
out so well for us because again, usually if you are a couple, if you're a part of a couple, then of course you
Yeah.
want to get a job at the same school. So to find a job, for teachers, it's usually easier. They're like, oh, math teacher, English teacher, boom. They're looking
Yeah.
for these two positions and we are those. But when you're in more
Yeah.
niche, like I'm looking for a school counselor job, it's not really a school counselor per se.
Yeah. Yes.
And also at the same time to have an opening in the IT department, it all felt very serendipitous. But I will
Yeah.
say in the international schools, and I think this can be a blessing and a curse. So for example, if you are part of a couple looking for a job and say that you find this unicorn position of counselor focusing more on mental health and well-being or director of well-being type positions, if they don't have quite the right position for your partner, depending on the school, many times they will try to work with you and say, well, does your partner have any experience with books? Because maybe we have a library assistant
Oh, wow.
opening. Or it can be a little bit random, but generally, depending on
Mhm.
the school, they want to keep you. So they know that, like, if it's not a good fit for the family or the couple, you're not going to stay very long. They do make efforts. And the
That's
position my
cool.
husband has now wasn't quite opened up before we came. So,
Oh,
so it did work out. And in my school in particular, this is different, of course, in every school, but because we're a boarding school, so we have just activities nonstop.
yeah.
So if there were a couple, one got the school counselor position and the other one there wasn't a position for, it would be like, well, what do you like? What can you teach after school? What
Yeah.
trips can you take the students on? Are you willing? It can easily become your whole life. And I think when you live on a boarding school
Yeah.
campus, like the work-life balance is can be challenging to separate. But that said, I do think I mean, it happened for me. So I think it's very possible for people to
That's
find a good
so
fit
neat.
for their family.
That's so neat. Even if you can't, I would imagine like pretty much everything's paid for anyway. So, I mean, the other one may not need to work or be with the kids or homeschool or, I mean, there's probably options that way too. Yeah.
Definitely.
That's incredible. I love this.
Thank you. I love it too.
So,
I feel very lucky.
so this is like super personal. You don't have to answer this, but like what kind of salary range are we talking? Are we talking like lower end or like higher? Like just because I'm sure people are wondering like, well, how much can you actually make doing this with all this stuff already included, you know?
I'll say it's hard to answer that question
Okay.
because, for example, in
Yeah.
Brazil, housing was covered, like water, electricity, et cetera.
Yeah.
That was covered.
Utilities.
Utilities. That was covered. Even like part of your phone bill was covered. Health insurance was covered. And then your monthly salary was in reais, which is the currency there.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so because of the volatility of the market and
Mm.
specifically the volatility of that currency, they would want to give you incentives. So for example, if you are a family who comes to Brazil and you have a kid in college or a mortgage payment back in the US or anything like that, but your monthly payment is reais, you might
Yeah.
not be able to cover that. So at that school in particular, they would start the year off depending on the year, but like a 20K bonus. And
Okay.
then for the rest of the year, you'd be paid in reais and your expenses would be covered. So
Oh.
if you are uber frugal, your savings potential could be pretty good if you don't have any other expenses. Now, I'm in a unique position here in Switzerland because there's a lot of schools in Europe that don't necessarily offer housing because the cost of living is just
Oh.
higher. Not to say that they never do, but just to
Hmm.
say when people are looking to stack their wealth,
Yeah.
they might go to South America first or Asia or the Middle East. You know, you can do really well in places like Dubai and Thailand, and the savings potential is significant when everything's factored in. In my particular school, because everything is covered, so if you look at my monthly paycheck, after daycare, you would think, okay, this is not like necessarily going to buy your millionaire retirement home.
Yeah.
But I think in the moment and considering so many factors, saving an astronomical amount of money is
Hmm.
less high on our list than job satisfaction and life satisfaction. We live in the Alps.
Yeah. Yeah. My God, it
And
must be gorgeous there.
it's gorgeous. And like for our
Oh,
kids, what
yeah.
they do for PE in the winter is skiing.
Oh
That's the
my
PE
gosh.
class.
That's incredible. Oh my gosh.
It is. It's so cool.
That is so cool.
So yeah, in terms of range, I'm never very good at that kind of thing. But
Hmm.
I'm in a Facebook group that's specifically focuses on like finances for expats
Oh,
specifically who work in international schools.
oh
And so
wow.
from what I read, like a teaching couple in Dubai has the earning potential to like save 60K a year. That's an
Yeah.
example. I wouldn't say it's as high, in my position, but
Mhm.
most people wouldn't expect that in Europe.
Oh, that's neat. In the city you're the town you're in, is it just a little cute town in Switzerland? Like with, I mean, literally like those picturesque things you see when you think of Switzerland. Is that what it looks like there?
It is like a postcard. I will say that, like, where I am in particular, if you are just like a young person who loves to get out all the time, you might go a little stir crazy, like on the mountain. And
Yeah.
there's plenty of like single people here, people without kids. And when they're off on weekends, they just take off wherever they want because we're very,
Yes.
we're like maybe 45-minute drive from
Yeah.
just over the border in France
Yeah.
and like an
Okay.
hour and a half from Italy, and then, a quick train to Geneva or Zurich or.
How fun. Do you guys, is that what you guys do like on your weekends and stuff? Are you like, let's go here, let's go here? Or is it just like you're living at home and it's like, well, maybe we'll take a vacation in like 6 months or something?
We try when we can. We have like different, because
Yeah.
we live here. So like my daughter has dance class and this and that. So we aren't so footloose and fancy free all the time. And
Hmm.
and I will say this is not the case in every boarding school, but in my
Yeah.
boarding school, one thing to consider if anyone's looking into this is that I am on call 24/7
Oh,
every
interesting.
third week.
Oh, okay.
So what that means is if a student is not well, if a student is having a panic attack, if a student is feeling like they don't want to be in the world, I'm on call. So that means
Gotcha.
every third week I'm not going anywhere. But because I have also a 4-year-old and, I think when she's older, we'll probably do more. But
Yeah.
at the moment, I mean, we get out there, we definitely are like, oh, let's take a day trip to France and
Oh
let's
my gosh. Yeah.
like last spring break, we just hopped over to Lake Como because
Gosh.
it's pretty
Gorgeous.
relatively close. And
That's
like
so
easy
cool.
jet flights from Geneva are just, cheap.
Yeah. Wow. And do you have summers off or is it year round school?
Oh, that's one of the best things. That is
Oh,
just one of the best things.
don't even tell me you have summers off. I'm
Yeah,
like,
I mean, I
wow.
basically like I'll finish beginning of June,
Oh
and
my
school won't start
gosh.
till the end of August. Like I'll need to be back like mid-August, but also
Yeah.
we have like almost a month at Christmas too.
That is incredible. But you could stay in your housing the whole time, right? You don't have to like leave, or do you?
Yeah, we can stay in our housing,
That is so
so
cool.
it's cool.
Oh my God. I am in love with your life. It's
Thank you, Kim.
awesome.
I feel great about my life. I feel so
Oh, you found
thankful.
such a neat niche. It's incredible. Oh my goodness. Ah, well, I could go on and on. I'm supposed to keep these short, and I feel like we've gone way longer than I'm supposed to go with these. But thank you so much for sharing all this. Super interesting. How do people reach out to you if they want to talk to you about this or
I'm working on a website because, as I said, I hope to take on one or two personal clients. But I'll be happy to give you my personal email address that you can include in the show notes. And if people
thank
have
you?
questions, they can reach out. And I'd be happy to share because when I think back to my one friend who's also a school counselor and can do therapeutic work, who
Yep.
just said to me, like, no, you look out there because they are looking for you. I'm so thankful to
Love
her
that.
because I just kept thinking like I don't want to be a school counselor, like that's not interesting to me, and I've been just really fortunate to get to do what I love, and
So
especially
awesome.
where I am now, I'm thankful. So I'm happy to talk to anyone who wants to reach out and chat more.
Thank you. Thanks so much for being here.